I know it's a cliche to open like this, but what can I say about WarioWare Minigame Mania? Well, besides having a different subtitle in North America, and a different name in Japan entirely. But yes, this is a video about the first ever WarioWare. I know my title and thumbnail didn't exactly help communicate that. This is one of those games that means more to me than it probably should, and I elevate it above all of its robust sequels, including the game that is basically this plus a whole lot more. For the record, I love WarioWare Gold. It is a strong contender for my favourite 3DS game, and not enough of you have played it. You need to rectify that now. But for this first entry, it has this kind of mythical hold on me, and it all started on my 10th birthday when I received this game alongside the SP revision of the Game Boy Advance. And at first, I didn't really get this game, or I didn't understand why people would play it. Why should I like this? Look, it was a new Wario game, but you didn't run and jump like his old games. He didn't even wear his normal clothes outside the first few seconds. Worst of all, the core gameplay here seemed to be these tiny time wasters where you press a single button and then it's all over within a few seconds. And worse, it speeds up after that. So it's so hard I can't do anything. Oh look, and there's a boss fight, I can't even beat it. What's the point? It wasn't what I asked for, or what I really wanted, and I sucked at it. But I was curious to see if it evolved beyond this, and as a kid, you have to make the most out of your presents. So I played it for a few minutes on my birthday morning, and then I ignored it for a while, probably because I had school, and I also had a PlayStation 2 awaiting me at home afterwards. Why would you play a portable game when there's a home console there? Young me had a lot of growing up to do, obviously, and this game might have been something that helped warp me into who I am now. That night, we went out to dinner as a family, and I brought my Game Boy Advance with me, and for the first time ever, I could actually play it at nighttime, something unimaginable before the SP. And I decided I need to play more of this game I just got. And yeah, I still sucked at it. I was abysmal. And between my morning attempt and the car ride, I still couldn't beat the first boss of WarioWare. This is a really simple timing minigame. It has a nice rhythm to it, but timing and rhythm are still some of the worst aspects I have, and it was much worse then. I'm the kind of person the first half of Rhythm Heaven Megamix was made for, and even then I still found that hard in my first playthrough. Look, there's a reason my videos are largely about RPGs, or short games I can keep replaying until I get good. I was never gifted with the best reflexes, and I've spent the last 20 years or so trying to fix that. And now that I'm 30, I have a few years less before I have flowers of Algernon and lose what I've gained thanks to the beauty of aging. But after more practice, I was able to beat this first boss, then I was onto more of this weird formula, and I was greeted with an aesthetic I couldn't believe was in a video game. You see, I was used to video games looking like, well, video games, but this was more than that. The main menu was looking like a modern computer, complete with pointless things like loading screens when you unlock something new. And our second set of minigames is framed with a flip phone, complete with an emoticon to celebrate your victories. I couldn't believe I was seeing something like this in a game. And now that it's 20 years later, this warms up my nostalgic heart for that period where the world was still equally as bad, war was inescapable, the economy was inching closer to a horrible collapse. But we also had Windows XP and flip phones, so it wasn't all bad, was it? Just on the menus alone, this game oozes so much charm, but the visuals and sound design reaches its peak in all the micro games, which have eclectic mixes of styles. There's hyper-realism, surrealism, and silly little guys that live this game, and I adore it. No two microgames look alike, well except for all the duplicate ones that share the same assets and recycle them into new games, like how this ninja can be used to dodge arrows, or jump onto the other side of a screen, or make copies of himself. They're little sister games to me. The reason this game has such a disjointed feel to it is because it was developed as a clear passion project. Though a precursor of this was seen in Japan previously with the Mario Artist series for the 64DD, the Polygon studio saw 8 microgames being played in quick succession as a fun time waster. But that was a small part of a larger game overall, and this had to prove the concept could push a whole game. When it came time to make this be a full game, everyone on the team contributed their own ideas, and the programmers chose their own varied art styles instead of going for a single unified look. And that's why this game is bonkers. This even comes with all the microgames having their own aspect ratio and not worrying about filling up the entire screen real estate. And I love it. This wild art even extends to the cutscenes. Look at that phone's placement, it makes no logical sense. And the perspective of that taxi building with the ominous clouds, it's perfect. In fact, I love this game's particular artistic flourishes a lot, especially as the sequels will round everything down to a more central art style. Which, don't get me wrong, I adore those, but the rough edges here live in my heart forever. This game straddles this kind of line of crude, unappealing art, but it never falls into it. It just mixes and matches everything into this viscous mix that works, even when it shouldn't. But what exactly is this game? I've talked about everything surrounding it, but not the game itself. Well, WarioWare is gaming at its simplest, and I do not mean that as a disparagement. Pick a set of levels, each with their own theme, like sports, or sci-fi, or nature. For the most part, this is just an aesthetic flourish that adds context to what you're doing. Because unlike the sequels, the gameplay here is largely the same beginning to end, though there are shake-ups like the logic-based games, which are more about simple deductive reasoning, like which is the right object, or which of these animations isn't the same. But other than that, it's all pretty samey. Game starts up, immediately see the overly simplified prompt telling you what to do, and then do it. Your only controls are D-pad and the A button. And given the nature of what's on screen, it's usually really easy to figure out what you're tasked with doing. Like if it's maneuvering something, the D-pad is what you'll need. Or if it's about waiting and reacting to a timing-based challenge, press A when you need to. Maybe it's a combination of them, like maneuver a crosshair and press A to shoot. I know it might feel daunting to have to figure out the controls for every single microgame, especially when there's over 200 of them and you only get a few handful of seconds to actually do it. But the way the game presents itself, it's flawless at letting you know how to handle everything. Though that is 30-year-old me saying that with 20 years of experience, there might be some bias. If that's the case and new players can't get into it, well, just practice it some more. This game is all about practice, and let's face it, you're never not practicing this game, because it's ultimately about beating your own high scores. Every attempt is you trying to get better. And you don't have to feel discouraged, because this isn't some arcade cabinet or a game with an online leaderboard, it is just you competing against yourself. No expert who played this game every day for 20 years can keep you out of that precious top 3. It's a challenge against yourself and no one else. It's an intimate high score game. It doesn't even have a name or initial entry screen for you, it's just you. And no matter what you do, you're always the best as far as you're concerned. The game does get tricky within no time, however. Like sure, your first playthrough through any set of levels is a single round, a boss fight, and that's it. But when you replay the game, the real meat of it begins. So what you do is, you play through any of the curated minigames of a given theme, you do a small number of them, they speed up a little, then you do some more, and it speeds up once again. After that set, it'll be the boss fight, which are not microgames, they're mini-games, I guess. They don't end super duper quickly. After completing that, everything will loop, but it will get a little harder. The games advance to their second stage of difficulty in addition to getting faster. Like the target you have to stop is a bit smaller, or where there was previously only one target, it's now 2. Or for example, this Wario, he was dodging traffic on a bike, but now it's in a wider car. It all ramps up incrementally like this. And once you do a whole round of this on level 2, it goes to level 3, which does things like make the target even smaller, or give you 3 targets to shoot, or Wario is in a wide truck, for example. It's really simple changes, but it really does test you, especially when the speed keeps on incrementing. For the rest of your time, it'll keep being these level 3 versions, but time becomes a precious commodity as everything happens so quickly and it transforms into this clusterfuck where you can barely react, and it basically turns into this instinctive muscle memory. During normal play, you have 4 lives before it's game over. Fail a game and you lose one. And you can restore a life by beating a boss, which gets ridiculous later on. And unlike your first round, you can actually fail bosses here, which means they're never a proper roadblock, it's just losing a life isn't ideal, especially when the alternative gives you a new one. Though your lives always cap out at 4, don't expect to farm anymore early in a run, you won't gain any until you're already struggling. I know it's simple, but to me this is what makes WarioWare what it is. 4 lives may seem like a lot, but you can only restore a maximum of 1 every couple dozen levels or so, and that's if you're good. It helps make it feel like you're always in the game and you always have a chance, and it's a small enough bonus that it delays the inevitable a little bit. Every attempt will be quick, but with a small enough safety net, meaning a few mistakes won't cost you everything. And these microgames are all framed in a sublime manner, with a story that sets up everything to give a little more context to what's going on. They're fun to watch, but if you're really impatient you can mash the buttons to skip them on a fresh save, but I would never do that. These are must-watch cutscenes. Well, for starters, the game's overall plot is based around Wario learning that the games industry is profitable, so he attempts to make his own games, and these are microgames because Wario isn't exactly giving it his all. They're crude, short, and pointless, so they're the opposite of me. Wario enlists his friends to help out for his own monetary gain, and we get a group of weird guys that I love. Before this game, Wario had his own identity as a Mario-adjacent character, but here we get characters that are super out of place, and I love them. Wario is the most out of place one here, and even he somehow fits in. So whenever we do a new set of stages, we get an introductory setup story. For example, Dribble and Spitz are taxi drivers, and they're taking their customers somewhere. Super simple, but it means between microgames when the score updates, we get a beautiful vista of the car's windscreen at night with rain against it. Or we have Mona. She is late for work, so she starts speeding, which attracts cops. So now her pet chimp has to keep killing cops, it's great. And since they're not all about driving, we see things like Dr. Crygor. He needs to use the toilet. That's it, that's a story, and you get to see a toilet every time between minigames. These aren't super compelling stories, but they're fun framing devices that give us a little bit of a chaotic look into the characters' lives. And when you first beat these campaigns, you give it an epilogue to see how their story really ends, and you can rewatch these cutscenes whenever you want. It's very cute and short, so it's half like me. You get more of his charming stuff in the manual of all places. Yeah, that thing no one bothers with anymore, but you're missing out on so much if you don't read this one. First of all, it's full colour and beautifully laid out. Not only that, but it has lots of comments from Wario, and even little activities like a little sticker book they encourage you to use, including a Mad Lib style Wario toast that you can use the word stickers for. I can't imagine ever doing this, I'd be too worried about ruining the manual, but it's frankly a level of fun you just never see in manuals, which are usually pretty standard, or at their best insult you for reading them. You even get Wario's list of things not to do with the cartridge, which includes not to eat it, or feed it to a dog, or don't hold your breath while playing this game because it makes it hard to breathe. It's all really important advice. The way the game builds you up is second to none. Well, probably not, but it sounded cool to say it that way. You see, you start with Wario's tutorial stages, which are all really easy unless you're me as a 10-year-old. There are hardly any games in this first set, so they're really easy to learn and practice with until you're familiar with them. After that, it's Jimmy, who is more of the same, but the training wheels are off and we have a larger variety of microgames to deal with. And he's such a cool guy that you don't want to let him down. Wario I don't mind disappointing. After this, the game opens up to 3 new characters who must all be completed, though the order is yours to choose. Of special highlight here is Ninefold, who became the part of a series each fan was most excited for, though I didn't pick up on his gimmick as a kid. His microgames are all about Nintendo's history, which means lots of old games I was already a fan of as a 10-year-old, like F-Zero, Mario Paint, Game & Watch Helmet, and then weird games I've never heard of, like Legend of Zelda or Duck Hunt. And then there's all these weird out-of-place things, which are based on Nintendo's non-gaming ventures. Young Me didn't pick up on all these being Nintendo related, because the game already had such weird and distinctive art styles, and I thought some of these were entirely new games with blocky art, especially since the game throws Nintendo-esque stuff normally at you, like Wario Bros or this Punch-Out inspired boxing game. It meant me seeing a familiar sight didn't cause me to make the connection that it was all themed. After playing this set of 3 levels, we're given Jimmy again, but with a new wig, and this is our first remix challenge. It's a set of old microgames we're already familiar with, but now it starts on the second difficulty. These aren't that hard, but it's a great little roadblock to make sure you're really getting the feel of this game before you move on, and it also serves as a mandatory way to make sure any player is aware that these microgames have higher difficulty variants, since some players may not have gone back for a round 2 yet. After that remix, we're given the odd trio who each stand out. Kat and Anna have the most standard games here, but as ninjas, their entire campaign uses Japanese text for things like our score, or for messages like speed up or boss. It is a very small visual change, but it's a really cute addition that I love, and I'm glad this was left like this internationally. Dr. Crygor's games are all based on the visual style of realism. You have photos crushed down to the Game Boy Advance's specs, and everything here looks phenomenal. It also never limits the artistic freedom. There's these microgames where a watermelon is bouncing on a sideways person in a white void, or someone trying to avoid a charging realistic rhino, while the background is a black void and the human is just a simple white outline, or yet more traditional photos, and some beautiful changes of pace like these clay-based ones. Not to dismiss the rest of the game, but Crygor's set are my favourite from a visual level. And then it's on to Orbulon with his brainy games, and I do still like these, but to me it's the low point of the game. These games run on a little longer, and they're all about making sure you read the instructions and can properly process everything. It's mostly about noticing things like the odd one out, or solving a little maze, or counting things, and they all play well, and I do love these, especially as the speed ramps up and it becomes an incredibly tense mess. It's just a different kind of challenge to everything else here, which is all about good reflexes, or other traditional video game skills. These ones have to make you think a little more. On their own, the Orbulon ones aren't my favourite, but they are really fun in the next remix, which we have again with Jimmy. And after that, it's on to the final challenge. It's Wario again. He bookends the game. He's our tutorial and our final boss. And his stuff is fun, but inherently there's less to say. Like, I do like that his last bunch does include some photo and clay art, and we also get more video game stuff reminiscent of Ninefold, but this time Wario is pasted on it. But really, this is more of the same. Though after you beat this game, you'll still have a lot of empty space on the menu. That's because there are mini-games that you have to unlock, which I'll get to in a second. But first, there are these remix challenge rooms, and I love them. And because of the way they're set up, you don't get extra lives here. It's a more punishing gauntlet. So you get things like the Thrilling Room, where every game is at its highest difficulty, or the Hard Room, where the game is way too fast and it's a nightmare. To hyperfixate on something else though, I love the microgame timer here. To me it is perfection, and that isn't hyperbole. You see, on a very simple level, it is just a bomb with a long fuse counting down. And it's proved so iconic and successful that a Wario-themed version of this bomb has become the series logo. It is shorthand for Wario's series about these quick, explosive games. But on a more fundamental level, this fuse counting down is both unmissable and avoids cluttering the whole screen. You could easily picture a version of this game with an overbearing timer that interrupts the visual clarity of everything, or an opposite situation, where players can't easily track the time. But here, it covers the whole bottom of the screen and never obscures anything, and the giant fire on the end of the fuse is there to always be in the corner of your eye to show you how much time is left. And after enough time, you'll even forget this timer is there. It is completely out of the way enough that you will rely entirely on the game's pacing, and it becomes second nature. All the surrounding elements of the game just melt away as your brain goes on autopilot and does its own thing, as you're bombarded with sound effects and visual stimuli telling you that you're doing well. and you only snap back to reality when you're greeted with the game over screen a few minutes later. This timer helps facilitate you into becoming the kind of player that can just keep playing on autopilot, though it won't get its fangs into you if you're not the kind of player this game was designed for. Lots of people beat a game and put it away. They might revisit it again, but not for such a long time that the game is almost new again. But that is the wrong attitude to have with WarioWare. This series demands you give it your all for an extended period of time. Go for those high scores, learn the game, best the game. And that's why this particular entry infests my brain more than any of its sequels. As a 10-year-old, I didn't have the money to constantly buy games, and while the Game Boy Advance library is phenomenal, as a kid I didn't have too many games for it, and a chunk of them were the lesser games no one really cares about anymore. So this became the only game I left in my GBA for a very long period of time. I'd play it in bed, and frankly, I'd play it every time I got a chance to. And while I give it my all every time a sequel comes out, I'm also, well, an adult, or back then, a kid with a few more options, and I wouldn't be as addicted to it as I am here. You never forget your first, and this game came out at the perfect time to capitalize on that for me. And this game rewards this level of dedication with lots of fun unlockables, including ones no one plays, and 2 flavors of Pyoro, this game that was the whole catalyst for the game's story. Some of the games here are fun multiplayer ones that would be really fun if I had friends. We had Dr. Wario, which makes owning Dr. Mario obsolete. Get out of here, you two. And we get the Fly Swatter from Mario Paint, but now it's with an awkward D-pad instead of the key gimmick of the mouse. And there's Sheriff, the arcade game, which is also awkward here, but look, it's a fun time waster. Some other minigames that we get to play are extended versions of existing microgames, like the skateboarding one, or this paper plane one. It's great that these gameplay mechanics got some love outside of the 3 seconds you're usually confined to. Everything here has the potential to be very addictive. And then you get the standout ones that everyone talks about, Pyoro. On this note, most unlocks are fine to get, but Pyoro 2, which is a fun time waster and I would recommend getting it, is a chore to actually unlock. You have to get individual high scores on each and every microgame. It's never hard to do, it just takes forever and it drains my soul. Going for every microgame's high score isn't exactly fun, but I'd recommend doing it while you've got a YouTube video or a podcast or something just to keep yourself motivated. It is a tedious thing, and I'm glad later sequels don't make you go through such a hurdle to unlock things. But the end result unlockable of Pyoro 2 is really fun, and I would recommend getting it, it's just I don't envy you while you're unlocking it. But that blemish for completionists aside, this whole game is basically perfect, at least as far as I'm concerned. There's nothing else to really criticize. It is this smorgasbord of fun high-score challenges that has not gotten old yet, even after 2 decades. No matter how simple or repetitive this looks, it always stays endearing. Though some games are basically cloned multiple times with very little difference, like stopping this bar is the same regardless of it being a character transforming, or slicing something, or performing a chop, or doing it again but it's Wario this time. But I don't mind this, because it's still the same fun gameplay at the end of the day, and we just have a little filler here. And the number of unique microgames isn't as high as it may seem. Some are better at hiding it, like using the D-pad to recreate the instructions of its band, or doing it again with a visually different setting where a hand instructs us instead, which then in turn leads to this cool dog doing those actions. They're functionally the same microgame, but the style carries it. And that's because frankly, there isn't too much you can only do with 4 directions, a single button, and a few seconds at most. Perhaps that's the reason the sequels went the directions they did, and I adore them, but the simplicity of the traditional controls here will win me over every time. It becomes this easy muscle memory game where I can give it to anyone without first explaining all the specific instructions on how to play. WarioWare's debut is probably the pinnacle of a perfect video game to me. I can even embarrass myself at the super hard challenge rooms. They're harder than they look, okay? This laid the groundwork for one of my favorite series ever, and it taught me how addictive high school games could be. Video games are, to me, at their most pure, when it's about replaying something over and over to show noticeable improvement. So next video I'll be talking about that again, but with a game you've never heard of for a system you've barely heard of. Buffer's Evolution for the Wonder Swan is a beautiful speed-focused platformer way ahead of its time, and it's fallen to obscurity as it's never left the single system which itself struggled to leave Japan.